Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Declan, as you know, commercial rates is a contentious issue amongst the business community. But what is the role of the Valuation Office in this regard?
Well, our role is simply, Karl, to fix the rateable valuations on each commercial property throughout the state. In our system here, there is what we call a separation of functions. In other words, the Valuation Office determines the valuation on each rateable property, but the local authority is involved in the assessment and collection of rates on an annual basis. And our valuation, multiplied by the annual rate on valuation, which is fixed by the elected members of a local authority, gives the rates liability for each individual property.
Now, the reason that I've asked you to join me on this morning's programme is to discuss Reval 19 and its implications for businesses across County Wexford. So, Declan, what is Reval 19 all about?
Well, Reval 19 is part of a national revaluation programme, and phase one of that programme would have involved the 4 Dublin local authorities as well as Waterford and Limerick. And then we completed Reval 2017 last year, and that involved 10 counties stretching from Sligo, Leitrim in the northwest down as far as Carlow and Kilkenny. And Reval 2019, I suppose, is the third phase, and we're now dealing with 7 counties in that, including Wexford. The other counties are Tipperary, Wicklow, Meath, Louth, Cavan and Monaghan. And all those counties are being revalued now at the same time, and they will all be... We will complete the revaluation of those local authorities in September of next year, and the new list will be published in September of next year. And then those new valuations will take effect for rates purposes from January of 2020 onwards. So the ratepayers in those local authorities will be paying their rates from 2020 onwards by reference to a new valuation list that we're compiling at the moment.
So what is the purpose of a revaluation?
I suppose the purpose of a revaluation is to bring the valuation list in a particular local authority up to date. If you take a county like Wexford, there are somewhere in the region of 4,000 to 4,500 commercial properties, and each of them have got a valuation at the moment fixed on them on the valuation list. However, those valuations, Karl, do not reflect current up-to-date values. They reflect market conditions that prevailed back in the 1980s. And it's important, therefore, that because rates are a charge on the value of the property that people occupy, it's important that those valuation lists reflect modern, contemporary valuations. So it's about restoring the degree of equity and uniformity that's needed in the system or that's required in the system. We talk about producing a valuation list at the end of this exercise that is that the valuations themselves are correct, but they're also equitable and uniform so that ratepayers occupying similar properties pay a similar amount in rates, and that one ratepayer doesn't have a competitive advantage or disadvantage over another. The other thing the revaluation does is that it improves the degree of openness and transparency in the system. If you were to go online now and look at the Wexford valuation list, all those valuations are expressed in what we would call nominal terms. A property might have a valuation of €100, and they might be paying something like maybe 7,000 or 8,000 euros in rates per annum. In a post-reval scenario, that €100 might be expressed in maybe 20,000 euros of rental value, and that's a currency, should we say, that's meaningful to occupiers. They would be aware of what the value of their property is. When we talk about value, I should have said, Charles, we're talking about letting value. And then, generally speaking, the multiplier that's fixed by the elected members of Wexford County Council in this instance will go from something like maybe a multiplier of 70 down to a fraction, which might be 0.23, 0.24, 0.25.
So do property owners need to do anything to prepare for the revaluation, and what is entailed in the process from the property owner's perspective?
Well, we would have written to each ratepayer in Wexford in October of last year, and we would have sent them an information pack, and we would have asked them to complete a reval information form and return that to us or to complete it online. And that would have included very general data on their property, things like details of who's in occupation, confirming some of the details that we held on that property by way of category and use. Then more recently, for a smaller number of ratepayers, we would have written to them requesting specific trading data. And we wrote to those ratepayers about sometime towards the end of June, and we've asked those people to provide us with that data. And coincidentally, the closing date for that data is is Tuesday the 24th of July. So I would be saying at this stage to those ratepayers in Wexford who received those requests for information, if you haven't provided us with that information to date, please do so now as soon as possible. But outside of that, ratepayers will hear from us again in March of next year. That's March of 2019. And at that stage, we'll write again to each ratepayer in Wexford. We will give them what we call a proposed valuation. So they'll receive a certificate from us that will let them know what valuation we propose to fix on their property when the list is published. And we'll show them how that valuation is calculated. And at that stage, they will have 40 days from the date we issue that proposed valuation certificate to make representations to us. So if they're dissatisfied with anything on that certificate, including the valuation, they'll have an opportunity to engage with us. Around the same time, Karl, that we issue those proposed valuation certificates, we will also, right throughout the county, hold what we call a series of walk-in clinics. And that's where a ratepayer in Wexford can walk into one of those clinics without an appointment and engage with our valuers and ask them questions about how their valuation is being calculated. And then based on that exchange, perhaps they might feel that their valuation is fair and reasonable, or alternatively they might want to make representations to us. I should say at that stage that the local authority, Wexford County Council in this instance, will publish what we call in the business an indicative ARV. So that will allow the ratepayer to estimate or get some idea as to what rates they're likely to pay on that new valuation.
So as part of Reval 19, Declan, what percentage of properties across County Wexford which are rated will be visited by the valuation office next year?
Usually throughout a revaluation project, Karl, we visit about 20 to 25% of properties. You might ask the question why we wouldn't visit 100% of them, and the reason for that is that we hold data on all properties. And we would have at some stage in the past, and in most cases in the recent past, visited one of those properties. What we're looking at this stage is we're looking at rental information, and we will be visiting some properties to confirm that the rental information we have on that property is accurate, and checking our surveys so that the analysis of that rental information is correct.
And apart from rental valuation, what factors will also be taken into consideration when completing the revaluation of a property?
Well, Karl, when we're actually trying to estimate the value, and as I said, that is the letting value of a property, on the assumption that the person paying the rent also maintains the building and insures the building and pays the rates. So that's the statutory definition of value that we're working towards. For most properties, there is significant market evidence out there that gives us rental data, and it's generally on the basis of the size and location of the property. However, there would be a small number of properties whose values are driven not just by size, but more by the volume of trade conducted on those premises. And I'm talking in particular here about properties like pubs, hotels, service stations, etc. So for those properties, we're looking at trading data, and we correlate that trading data with the rent that's been paid in some of those properties, and use that to develop what we call a valuation scheme that we apply then to other properties that we have trading data on, but that we don't actually have rental values on those properties.
So when you say trading data for the likes of licensed premises, hotels and service stations, does that mean that those property owners have to provide you with audited accounts?
Yes, we request, let's say, for the likes of a hotel, we would request the trading data for the 3 most recent trading years and a breakdown of that data to let us know what the income streams would be for things like, bedroom sales, hospitality, drink, food and beverage, that sort of thing. Equally for, let's say, pubs, we're looking at, let's say, the volume of on sales, the volume of off sales, food sales, and the other ancillary income that might be generated on that premises.
And in terms of the varying levels of footfall in the different parts of each county, how much of an impact will these levels have on the final rateable valuation figure?
They would generally have what I would call a significant level, because at the end of the day, I should have said at the outset, Karl, this is an evidence-based exercise, and it's by reference to evidence in a particular locality. So what we do is, let's say if you take the main street in the provincial town, we look at the rents that are achieved in that town, and that usually reflects things like footfall and commercial activity.
And will the Valuation Office be reviewing lease agreements or applying the market analysis model in determining the annual rental value of a property?
Well, we will be looking at lease agreements and rents achieved, let's say, in the marketplace. We'll be analysing all of those, making sure that analysis adjusts that back to the statutory definition that I referred to earlier. And then we will use our experience looking at that, usually removing what we might call the outliers, because what we're looking all the time is at a basket of transactions, because what we're trying to achieve is a valuation list that is correct, but also that it's got a degree of equity and uniformity in it.
And Declan, once deratable valuation has been determined, can the property owner appeal the decision of the Valuation Office?
Yes, Karl, there are a number of opportunities right throughout the process whereby the ratepayer can actually engage with us. Now, the first one I've already maybe referred to is the representation stage, where once we issue the proposed valuation certs next March, the ratepayer can, within 40 days, engage with us. That's a very informal process. However, the only way they can make representations to us is by completing a form and submitting it to us. Once we have considered those representations, we will make whatever changes we need to make to those valuations and any other properties that we deem are similarly circumstanced. And then we produce a final list next September. Once that list is published, and the publication date for that list is the 17th of September 2019, any ratepayer, or indeed the local authority, can appeal any valuation on that valuation list within 28 days to the Valuation Tribunal. Now, the Valuation Tribunal is an independent body used to determine or deal with disputes between ourselves and ratepayers and rating authorities in terms of any particular valuation. I should say at this stage that there is a fee associated with that, and it is quite a formal quasi-judicial process. So we will be encouraging ratepayers throughout this process to deal with us earlier on in the process and engage with us so that both the ratepayer and ourselves can avoid days before the Valuation Tribunal.
And in terms of appeals, what percentage of appeals have been successful, Declan?
I don't exactly have a figure for that, Karl, but I'll give you an example. Right throughout Reval 2017, those counties that stretch from Sligo, Leitrim down to Carlow, Kilkenny, the appeal rate to the Valuation Tribunal was about 4%. Quite a modest figure. Those appeals are being heard at the moment. However, while some appeals will see, I should say, there's a potential at any appeal that a valuation will either go up or down. The vast majority of them that are altered actually do come down. It's fair to say that. We tend to measure, let's say, the outcome in terms of what we lose from the entire valuation list. And we would have completed a revaluation of your neighbouring county there, Waterford, back in 2013 or 2014, and the total amount lost on that list to date is somewhere in the region of about 0.4 of 1%.
Now, as Reval 19 is the third phase of the National Revaluation Programme, what percentage of property owners can expect an increase in commercial rates across Wexford?
Well, Karl, this is quite difficult to predict because each local authority is unique. The amount of rates that people will pay, the amount that individual ratepayers will pay at the end of the day is a function of the valuations we fix on them. The makeup of that valuation list in terms of different property types, and ultimately the total amount of money that the local authority hopes to actually collect in rates or intends to collect in rates, and that's kind of the key criteria. But we generally talk about, in a post-reval scenario, that 60% of ratepayers will see a reduction in the rates liability and that 40% will see an increase.
And Declan, specifically, what type of classes of property are most likely to see their rateable valuation increase?
Well, I suppose you can reflect, if you were to reflect on what's happened in our economy in the last decade or so, we have seen a very, very extreme recession. But if you were to look at that, you would see that there are some businesses that actually have held their own throughout that recession, and in some cases maybe strengthened their trade. You're always going to see, let's say, a particular location on a high street, stretch of a high street that has survived the recession quite well. You will see a lot of service stations that have been developed on the outskirts of our towns seeing increases in a post-reval scenario.
What about hotels?
Hotels, again, quite a mixed bag. Hotels, I suppose, in revaluations to date, we've seen a number of reductions in the hotel sector. And again, hotels are very specific, and they can be hotels that for some reason are doing quite well, and others that are equally struggling.
And Declan, when will the new valuation come into effect from?
We will publish the new valuation list, so the Commissioner of Valuation will publish the new valuation list on the 17th of September. I should say at this stage that the valuation list is a public document, so from in the early hours of that morning you can go online and see what your own valuation is if you're a ratepayer, or see what it is for all other ratepayers. That new valuation list becomes effective at the end of October 2019 from a budgetary point of view, so the Wexford County Council can use those valuations to calculate their ARV for 2020. And then the new from a ratepayer's perspective, those new valuations on that valuation list will be used to calculate their rates liability for 2020.
And Declan, finally, looking ahead beyond Reval 19, how regularly will the rateable values of commercial and industrial properties be reviewed?
Well, that's a feature of the new legislation, in that once we have completed the revaluation of any local authority area, we are required to carry out the second or the subsequent revaluation no sooner than 5 years or no later than 10 years.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.